The canyon was a coffin. 200 fighters rained death from the ridges. 24 SEALs pinned, bleeding, with no air support. The radio hissed the words that froze their hearts. You're on your own until dawn. 7 endless hours away. A young SEAL whispered, "Dear God, save us!" And then it happened. A single rifle crack tore through the chaos. One enemy gunner collapsed, then another, then an RPG exploded harmlessly in midair. The tide of battle shifted by an unseen hand. Who was this hidden sniper, and how did one invisible shot after another change certain death into survival? This is VeteranBiker. Comment 1 if you're new, 2 if you've been with us, 3 if you ride with us every week. Like, subscribe, and stay to the end. The Pamir Highlands rose like the bones of the earth itself, ridges jagged and raw against a sky that glowed with the fading fire of late afternoon. Dust swirled through the mountain passes, carried by a dry wind that scraped at the skin and howled like a warning no one wanted to hear. In the valley below, 24 Navy SEALs pressed themselves against fractured stone, their rifles angled toward the high ridges. The silence before contact had stretched too long, too heavy, and every man felt it in his gut. Something was wrong, something was waiting. Captain Callahan adjusted his helmet, eyes narrowing as he scanned the ridgelines through binoculars. His voice was low, controlled, but the edge of tension was unmistakable. Keep your eyes sharp, no chatter, something about this feels off. Beside him, Private Jacobs wiped a streak of sweat from his brow. "Sir, you have said this path was clear." Callahan didn't answer immediately. He keyed the radio, static crackling in his ear. "Base, this is Viper team. Confirm last drone feed. Over." The reply was a long hiss of static, then a broken voice. "Signal lost. UAV offline. Stand by for reboot." The captain's stomach dropped. A drone losing feed over open terrain wasn't routine, not here. Not when every move had been planned down to the last second. He clenched his jaw, muttering, "God damn it, this is no glitch." The men shifted uneasily, watching their commander, waiting for instructions. Callahan forced calm into his voice. "Hold position, eyes on glass. We wait for confirmation." But confirmation never came. The first shot cracked across the valley, echoing from the rocks. Then another, then a dozen more. The ridges lit up with muzzle flashes, stuttering fire dancing like angry stars. Bullets screamed into the canyon, striking stone, throwing up shards that cut at exposed skin. "Contact!" someone shouted. Chaos erupted. The SEALs scrambled for cover, returning fire toward shadows that moved with deadly purpose above them. They were pinned. The high ground belonged to the enemy, and from the sound of it, there weren't a handful of fighters up there. There were hundreds. Callahan pressed his back to the rock, gripping the radio. "Base, this is Viper team. We are under heavy contact. Repeat, heavy contact. Multiple firing positions, at least company strength. Request immediate air support." The answer was another gut punch, negative on air support. Weather over the mountains is shutting down all flights. Closest birds can't launch until dawn. Dawn was more than 7 hours away. 7 hours of hell. Private Reynolds, the youngest of the team, huddled behind a boulder, bullets sparking inches from his boots. His voice shook as he muttered, "We're already dead, sir. We just don't know it yet." "Shut your mouth and keep firing," Callahan barked, though he couldn't shake the weight of the truth in the boy's words. The enemy was everywhere. Machine guns hammered from 3 ridges. RPGs arced overhead, explosions rocking the valley floor. Dust and smoke turned the air thick, choking, impossible to breathe without tasting gunpowder and grit. Everywhere he looked, Callahan saw the same thing, men fighting with everything they had, but with no way out. They were trapped in the bowl of the valley, surrounded by an enemy that had been waiting for them, and the thought gnawed at him. How had the enemy known? The UAV had gone dark seconds before the ambush. The timing was too perfect, the precision too exact. This wasn't bad luck. This was betrayal. "Captain!" Lieutenant Ross shouted from the flank. "We're low on ammo already. We can't hold this!" Callahan ducked as a rocket struck close, the blast lifting him off the ground and slamming him back against the stone. His ears rang, blood trickling from his temple. He pushed himself up, fighting to focus. "We hold!" he roared. "We hold this ground until dawn. No one moves. We fight smart. Conserve your rounds." But his men saw it in his eyes, the flicker of doubt. Against 200 fighters with the high ground, no amount of smart shooting would save them. Another RPG slammed into the rocks above, showering them with burning fragments. Private Jacobs screamed as shrapnel tore into his arm. Two others dragged him to cover, field dressing him under fire. Bullets rained like steel hail. Every second stretched into eternity. Every breath fought for in the chaos. The SEALs were some of the toughest men alive, but even they knew the truth. No one wanted to speak aloud. This was it. Pinned down, cut off, betrayed by their own intelligence, the team was bleeding toward annihilation, and the thought that gnawed at every mind was the same whispered prayer that slipped past cracked lips. "Dear God, save us!" Captain Callahan pressed his head against the stone, his knuckles white around the grip of his rifle. He thought of the men's families, the promises he couldn't keep. He thought of the mission they'd been told mattered, though now it reeked of a setup. He thought of Panama, of hail, of ghosts that never left. The valley burned with gunfire, and somewhere in the back of his mind he almost accepted it. They weren't going home. Then it happened. A single shot cracked across the mountains, sharp, clean, different from the chaos. It silenced the night for a heartbeat. Callahan lifted his head, scanning. The heavy machine gun on the north ridge stuttered, then went dead. Its operator slumped forward, a hole clean through his skull. "What the hell?" Ross muttered. 3 seconds later, another shot. An RPG carrier spun backward, his warhead detonating uselessly in a fireball that lit the ridge. The team froze. The enemy froze. Everyone turned toward the echo of that unseen rifle. A third shot, faster, deadlier. The enemy spotter who had been directing fire collapsed instantly, his radio clattering onto the rocks. Callahan's pulse thundered in his ears. He swept the ridgelines with his binoculars, searching for the source. Nothing. No silhouette, no flash, no trace. Just death appearing like judgment from the sky. One by one, positions that had pinned the SEALs began to fall silent. Precision fire ripped through the Taliban fighters, cutting them down before they could react. The tide wasn't just shifting, it was being turned with purpose, deliberately. "Who the hell is out there?" Reynolds gasped, eyes wide. Callahan had no answer. He keyed his radio again, half expecting static. Instead, a calm voice broke through, firm and familiar, sending a shock down his spine. "Sierra Whiskey to Viper team, move northeast toward the compound, you'll have cover." For a moment Callahan thought his mind had cracked under the pressure. That voice, it couldn't be. He stared at the radio, stunned. "Emma?" he whispered. Emma Ward, the communications specialist he'd dismissed as fragile, as porcelain, the woman who was supposed to be safe back at base. The one he'd written off 6 months ago. Her voice was clear, commanding, impossible to mistake. "I've got you covered, Captain. Now move. Callahan's men exchanged stunned glances, disbelief etched across their faces. The porcelain comms tech, the one they thought couldn't hack it, she was the hidden sniper, and with each shot she fired from the unseen ridge, the impossible began to feel possible again. The fight wasn't over. Not yet. The echoes of Emma's rifle still lingered across the valley, a rhythm of thunder that didn't come from the enemy's guns, but from her own calculated strikes. Each shot created a pocket of silence, a breath of relief, where moments earlier there had only been fear and fire. The SEALs moved with renewed vigor, not out of blind hope, but because someone unseen was holding back the tide just enough for them to fight. Captain Callahan crouched behind fractured stone, pressing the radio close to his lips. His voice was sharp, desperate, demanding answers. "Identify yourself. Sierra Whiskey, confirm your position." Static crackled for a moment, then Emma's calm voice cut through, precise as her marksmanship. "Eastern Ridge." "You won't see me, Captain. That's the point. Now move northeast before they regroup. You've got less than 3 minutes." The men exchanged looks of disbelief. Reynolds shook his head, muttering, "She's supposed to be back at base. Shut it and move," Callahan snapped, though his own mind reeled. Emma Ward, the porcelain specialist they'd mocked for months, was the one holding the line. He forced the thought away. There would be time for answers later. Right now, there was only survival. The SEALs broke cover in coordinated groups, moving northeast in bounding leaps. Emma's rifle cracked again, dropping an enemy fighter who had tried to flank the movement. Another shot took down a machine gun nest before it could cut into the withdrawing SEALs. Reynolds stumbled as rounds kicked up dust near his boots. Callahan grabbed him by the harness, yanking him forward. "Keep moving, Private! Don't you die on me now!" Above, the ridges spat fire again, but it was disorganized, fractured. The enemy had lost cohesion. Every time they tried to rally, Emma's scope found their leaders, cutting the chain of command one bullet at a time. "Where the hell did she learn to shoot like that?" Ross whispered between ragged breaths as they sprinted for a cluster of boulders. Callahan didn't answer. He'd seen her file, her Olympic medals, the whispers of training that went deeper than anyone admitted. But this wasn't range shooting. This was war, chaotic and brutal, and she was handling it like she'd been born in the crosshairs. They slid into cover behind the rocks, gasping for breath. Jacobs groaned as blood seeped through the field dressing on his arm. Ross pressed harder on the wound, muttering encouragement. "Base still dark?" Callahan asked. "Comms are trash," Ross confirmed. "We're cut off." Emma's voice came through again, steady. "You're not cut off. You've got me. Stay low. I'll guide you through. Head for the compound 3 clicks northeast. It's partially fortified. You can hold until dawn." Callahan's instincts warred with logic. "And you? You can't cover us forever." A pause. "Then I'll manage. I've trained for this." He wanted to press, to demand more, but another volley of enemy fire forced his hand. Decisions had to be made in seconds, not debated for minutes. "All right," he said into the radio. "We move on your mark. Make it count." "Already counting," Emma replied. She shifted her position on the ridge, sliding across jagged stone until she found a new angle. Her father's lessons whispered through her memory. Never fire twice from the same spot. Always stay unpredictable. She adjusted her scope, marking enemy positions. 3 squads advancing in a staggered line, trying to cut off the SEALs' retreat. Emma exhaled, slow and measured, and squeezed the trigger. The lead fighter dropped instantly. Another exhale, another squeeze, and the second man crumpled before he could call out. She shifted again, firing at the rear guard, sowing confusion in their ranks. Below, Callahan gave the order, "Move!" The SEALs broke from cover once more, Emma's rifle shots falling like guardian fire around them. She guided them through kill zones with deadly precision, cutting holes in the ambush that the team exploited to slip past. Minutes stretched into eternity as the team fought their way northeast. The compound loomed in the distance, dark and weathered, a relic of some forgotten war. Its concrete walls were cracked, but it was shelter, and right now, shelter was life. They burst through the rusted gates, dragging the wounded with them. Callahan barked orders, directing men to secure firing positions along the broken walls. Reynolds dropped beside a sandbag pile, reloading with trembling hands. Jacobs was laid against the wall while the medic worked feverishly on his arm. For the first time in hours there was a pause in the storm, a fragile, fleeting pause. Callahan pressed his radio. "Sierra Whiskey, status?" Emma's breathing was heavy but controlled. "I'm good. I'm repositioning for overwatch on the compound. You're not safe yet. They'll regroup fast." He leaned his head back against the wall, closing his eyes for half a second. Relief warred with disbelief. She wasn't just alive, she was saving them, every one of them. Ross crouched beside him. "Sir, you really think she can hold them off all night?" Callahan opened his eyes, staring at the blood-soaked dirt. "I don't think, I know, because if she can't, none of us are walking out of here." On the ridge, Emma assembled her Barrett rifle, her hands moving with muscle memory burned in by years of training no one knew about. She sighted through the scope, the compound below filling her vision, the SEALs inside fighting to catch their breath. Then she shifted her aim to the ridges beyond, where enemy fighters regrouped in clusters, 200 strong, maybe more, and they were angry now, angry and cautious, aware of the unseen sniper who had cut them down. Emma slowed her breathing, steady as stone. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, "Never leave your team behind." She whispered it aloud, a vow carried on the mountain wind. "I won't, Dad! Not tonight!" The first wave surged, shouting war cries as they charged toward the compound. Emma's scope tracked them, her finger tightening on the trigger. The Barrett roared. Down in the compound, Callahan's men opened fire, their renewed confidence fueled by the thunder from the ridge. They weren't just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting with the knowledge that someone was watching over them, a hidden guardian who refused to let them fall. The night was far from over, but for the first time since the ambush began, the SEALs believed dawn might come. And Emma Ward was the reason why. The compound shuddered with every impact, stone walls cracking under the hail of bullets and RPG blasts. Dust rained from the ceiling, stinging the eyes of men already raw with exhaustion. Inside, the SEALs held their ground, each man cycling between fire, reload, and the briefest moment of breath before another wave pressed them down. From her vantage point on the eastern ridge, Emma Ward watched the chaos unfold through her scope. The night had grown colder, the air sharp and thin, but sweat still rolled down her back beneath her gear. Every shot she fired had to count. Every trigger squeeze bought the SEALs another 30 seconds of life. She saw a fighter set up an RPG, his shadow flickering in the muzzle flashes of his comrades. Emma adjusted for distance, elevation and wind, exhaled and squeezed. The rocket never fired. Target down, she murmured to herself, shifting positions immediately. Her father's lessons were etched into her bones. Never linger, never give them a pattern. She slid along the jagged ridge until she found a new firing slit between two boulders. Her scope swept across the valley, picking out shapes, movements, threats. Below, Captain Callahan's voice was hoarse from shouting commands. "Keep your heads low! Conserve ammo! Make them bleed for every inch!" He crouched beside Jacobs, who was pale from blood loss but still conscious, his teeth gritted against the medic's stitching. Ross leaned over from his post. "Sir, we can't hold like this till dawn, not with this many of them." Callahan met his eyes. "We're not alone anymore. She's out there." As if to punctuate his words, Emma's rifle cracked again, cutting down a fighter who had been flanking their weakest wall. Reynolds blinked, still shaking from adrenaline. "She's not porcelain," he muttered. "She's iron." Emma's voice broke in over the comms. "Captain, regroup northeast wall. That's where they'll push hardest. I've got the south covered." Callahan hesitated for only a breath before giving the order. "You heard her. Move." The team repositioned, dragging sandbags, stacking debris into makeshift barricades. They worked like men possessed, driven by the knowledge that someone unseen was covering their blind spots. Emma zeroed in on a cluster of figures moving with unusual discipline. These weren't ordinary Taliban fighters. Their formation was too tight, their weapons too advanced. She saw glints of optics, heard the distinct rhythm of coordinated fire. A chill settled in her stomach. These men had training, Russian maybe, or contractors. Her scope settled on one of them, a tall figure with a long rifle, moving carefully along the ridge opposite hers. The way he carried himself made her blood run cold. A sniper. He was searching for her. She pulled back behind the rock, controlling her breathing. This was the duel her father had warned her about, the moment every sniper dreads when hunter becomes hunted. She reached into her pack, pulling out the flexible rod and mirror she'd prepared. Slowly she raised it, angling the reflection over the ridge. Through the tiny pane of glass she saw him, scanning, waiting, disciplined. He was good, but he wasn't perfect. She noted the faint cloud of disturbed dust near his rifle barrel, just visible in the moonlight. A tell. She memorized the angle, calculated quickly, and dropped the mirror. Her body moved in fluid precision. She rolled into firing position, aimed at the patch of disturbed dust and fired. The crack of her Barrett echoed, followed by silence. She waited, breath held, scanning for movement. Nothing. Through the scope, she confirmed. A body slumped on the rocks, rifle abandoned. She didn't allow herself the luxury of relief. If there had been one counter-sniper, there could be more. She shifted position again, crawling across the ridge until she found a new nest. Back in the compound, Callahan barked over the radio. "We've got incoming, west wall, heavy machine gun." Emma pivoted, scanning quickly. There, mounted on a makeshift tripod, spraying arcs of fire that chewed through concrete like paper. She steadied, aimed for the gunner's exposed neck, and fired. He dropped instantly, the weapon falling silent. "Gun down," she reported. "Copy that," Callahan replied, his voice steadier now. Minutes blurred into an endless cycle of fire. Reload, relocate. Emma's hands were raw, her shoulders aching from the Barrett's recoil, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Each kill was another step toward dawn, another chance for the SEALs to survive. But even as she fought, questions gnawed at her. Why had the enemy known their route? Why were professional fighters mixed in with the Taliban? Why had Colonel Hale insisted she bring climbing gear, insisted she know the eastern ridge? None of it added up. Her earpiece crackled with a secure channel, the one Captain Callahan had given her in secret. "Morgan," his voice said, tight and urgent. "Where are you?" "Eastern ridge, covering your flank," she whispered back. "You're not at base. I knew it. Listen, this whole thing stinks. Intel was wrong from the start. There's too many of them. This wasn't just bad luck. This was a setup." Emma's stomach clenched. She'd suspected as much, but hearing Callahan confirm it made the truth heavier. "What about the target?" she asked. "Empty. Compounds clean, no scientist, no asset. We've been played." Her mind raced. If the target wasn't here, then what was the real mission? And why had Hale pushed so hard to keep her involved? Before she could answer, Callahan's voice hardened. Morgan, whatever happens, don't stop what you're doing. You're the only reason we're still alive, but keep your eyes open. Something bigger is going on here." She acknowledged quietly and cut the channel. Her scope swept the battlefield again. Fighters pressed in waves, but each time they surged, she cut them down. Still, she could feel the tide pressing harder, faster. They weren't retreating. They were holding them here. And then she saw it. On the far side of the valley, away from the main battle, a small group of men slipped through the chaos. They weren't moving toward the compound. They were leaving it. At their center, they carried a long, reinforced case. Emma's blood froze. It wasn't about an extraction. It wasn't about a scientist. It was about whatever was in that case. She whispered into the comm, "Captain, I've got movement east. Small team carrying something. Not heading toward you. Heading away." There was a pause, then Callahan's voice, grim. "What kind of something?" Emma tracked the case through her scope, watching the men handle it with extreme care. Reinforced, heavy, about a meter long, her heart pounded as the possibilities clicked into place. "The kind you don't drop," she said softly. The night roared again with gunfire, but for Emma, the world narrowed to that single sight. The case, the men, and the realization that everything they'd been told was a lie. And in that moment, she understood. She wasn't just fighting to save her team anymore. She was fighting to stop something far worse than an ambush. The compound shook again with another explosion. Callahan's voice barked orders in the background. Emma reloaded, steadying her hands, and fixed her scope back on the case. "Never leave your team behind," her father had said. But this was bigger than a team, bigger than all of them. And she was the only one who could see it. The compound's walls were crumbling with each fresh impact. RPG fire slammed into stone and concrete, sending shards spraying across the men who crouched low behind what little cover remained. The SEALs were battered, bruised and bone-weary, but their lines hadn't broken. Not yet. Captain Callahan barked orders through the chaos, his voice hoarse from shouting. "Shift fire left! Reynolds, eyes up! Don't let them breach the wall!" Reynolds wiped sweat and dust from his brow, raising his rifle. His magazine clicked empty after only a few bursts. "I'm running dry, sir. Make every bullet count," Callahan growled, though he knew the truth. If Emma hadn't been on the ridge, they'd already be dead. Above, Emma Ward adjusted her scope, scanning the valley below. Her body screamed with fatigue. Her hands were blistered from recoil. Her eyes stung from hours pressed against the rifle's glass. But she kept firing. Every shot was deliberate, precise. A fighter ducking behind cover, gone. A machine gun nest preparing to fire, silenced. Each pull of the trigger was another lifeline for the men below. Her comm crackled with Callahan's voice, quieter now, filtered through exhaustion. "Sierra Whiskey, we can't hold this much longer. Tell me you've got something." Emma exhaled slowly, steadying her voice. "I see them, Captain. East Ridge, small group moving out. They're carrying a reinforced case." Callahan swore under his breath. "So that's it, the real mission. We were never meant to extract a scientist, were we?" Emma didn't answer. The truth was already written in front of them, carried away by mercenaries who walked calmly through a battlefield because the SEALs had been lured into a slaughter. "I'm going after them," she said firmly. "Negative," Callahan shot back. "We need you here. You leave, we're finished." Emma hesitated, her rifle still trained on the case. She could see the men's discipline, their equipment, the way they moved with synchronized precision. This wasn't Taliban. This was something far more dangerous. Her gut told her the case wasn't just important, it was catastrophic. But below her, 24 Americans were still alive because of her. And without her, they wouldn't last an hour. She ground her teeth, forcing herself to refocus. "Copy that, Captain. I'll keep you breathing." Her scope swept back to the ridges. She shifted her angle to cover the northeast wall, where fighters were massing for another charge. A dozen shadows surged forward, their war cries cutting through the night. Emma's rifle barked again, cutting down the leaders first. Chaos rippled through their ranks. The SEALs seized the moment, unleashing controlled bursts that tore the assault apart before it reached the wall. Inside the compound, the men cheered faintly, their voices half disbelief, half gratitude. "She's cutting them down like it's nothing," Reynolds said, reloading. His hands shook, but his eyes burned with a new kind of faith. Ross grinned through cracked lips. "Porcelain? Hell, she's our damn guardian angel." Callahan said nothing, though inside he felt the same. He doubted her, resisted her, even mocked the idea of her being on the team. And now, here she was, saving his men with every pull of the trigger. The radio crackled again, but this time it wasn't Emma. It was Colonel Hale, his voice smooth, commanding, detached.
"Captain Callahan, report status." Callahan's jaw tightened. "We're pinned down. Intel was wrong."
Enemy numbers far exceed expectations. Request immediate extraction and air support. "Negative," Hale replied. "Extraction assets are committed elsewhere. Hold until dawn." "Hold?" Callahan spat. "We'll be wiped out before dawn. The mission parameters remain," Hale said coldly. "Your sacrifice is noted. Continue to engage." The line went dead. Ross slammed his fist against the wall. "Sacrifice? He just wrote us off!" Callahan's knuckles whitened around his rifle. He didn't answer. He couldn't. He knew now what Emma must already suspect. They weren't just caught in a trap. They were meant to be here, bleeding and dying, while someone else walked away with the real prize. Emma, still listening on the secure channel Callahan had given her, heard every word. Her stomach twisted. Hale had played them all, just as he had played her father years ago. Her eyes locked on the men with the case, now farther away, their figures shrinking against the horizon. She couldn't reach them yet, but she wouldn't forget them. That case was the key, and somehow she would get to it. Below, another explosion shook the compound, collapsing part of the southern wall. Dust and fire filled the air as enemy fighters poured through the breach. Callahan roared, "Hold that line!" Reynolds and Jacobs fired side by side, cutting down the first wave, but more followed, screaming, charging, desperate to overwhelm the Americans with sheer numbers. Emma shifted instantly, her rifle barking 3 times in succession. 3 fighters fell in mid-charge, their momentum broken. She reloaded swiftly, scanning for the next priority target. "South breach stabilized," she reported, voice flat despite her racing pulse. "You're saving our lives," Callahan replied quietly. It wasn't an order, wasn't a command. It was an acknowledgement, raw and heavy with respect. For the first time, Emma allowed herself a thin smile, but it vanished quickly as her scope caught movement higher on the ridge opposite her. Another glint, another shadow. Her blood chilled, another sniper. She shifted, rolling behind a boulder just as a round cracked into the rock where her head had been. Stone chips sliced across her cheek. She hissed in pain, gripping her rifle tighter. The duel had begun again. She crawled low, inching across the ridge. The enemy sniper was patient, disciplined, sweeping his scope in slow arcs. She could feel his presence like a predator's stare, waiting for her to make the wrong move. Her father's voice echoed in her head. Patience wins. Let them show themselves first. Minutes dragged by, each one a lifetime. Then a mistake, however small. The sniper shifted, his barrel catching the faintest glint of moonlight. Emma's rifle snapped up. She fired. The figure jerked violently and collapsed. She exhaled, steady but shaken. Her cheek stung, warm blood trickling down her face, but she didn't care. She was still alive, and her team was still alive. Back at the compound, Callahan's men regrouped behind barricades. Their ammo was running dangerously low, but their spirits burned with a stubborn will. "We'll make it," Ross said, half to himself. "We've got her." Callahan looked toward the eastern ridge, though he couldn't see her through the darkness. "Yeah," he muttered, "we've got her." But Emma wasn't just theirs. She was becoming something more, something Hale hadn't planned for, something even he couldn't control, because she wasn't fighting his war anymore. She was fighting hers, and the battle for that case, for the truth hidden inside it, was only beginning. The compound smelled of smoke and blood, a choking mixture that clung to every breath the SEALs drew. The men huddled low against the shattered walls, rifles braced, magazines nearly empty. The silence between bursts of fire was worse than the noise, short, uneasy pockets where they could hear the enemy's boots scraping stone, voices calling in harsh Pashto, signals for the next attack. Captain Callahan crouched beside Reynolds, his face smeared with dirt and ash. "How many mags?"
"2 left, sir,"
Reynolds answered, his voice trembling. Callahan nodded grimly. "Make them count." He tapped his headset, lowering his voice. "Sierra Whiskey, status." Emma lay flat against the ridge, cheek pressed into the scope of her Barrett rifle. Her body ached from the climb, from hours of recoil, from the cold that sank into her bones, but she didn't let her breathing falter. Her eye tracked shadows moving along the tree line. "Still with you," she answered. 12 hostiles regrouping north, another 20 shifting west. They'll hit in waves. You think we can hold? Emma's voice stayed calm, though inside she knew the truth. "You'll hold if I keep them blind," her father's words whispered again, the same lesson he'd drilled into her as a girl. "Never let them see you panic. Panic kills faster than bullets." Emma steadied her breathing, adjusted her aim, and squeezed. The Barrett thundered. A fighter toppled before he could signal the advance. Another round. Another man fell. She shifted 3 degrees, fired again, and a mortar team scattered in terror. Below, the SEALs raised their heads, hearing the crack of her rifle and the chaos it created. Ross grinned fiercely, reloading his last mag. "She's writing death across the ridge." "Porcelain, my ass," Jacobs muttered through gritted teeth as the medic tightened a tourniquet on his bleeding arm. "She's steel." But even steel could bend, and Emma felt it with every pull of the trigger. Fatigue gnawed at her muscles, but worse was the creeping dread. Her scope caught sight of movement on the far plateau. Not Taliban, not mercenaries, too disciplined, too deliberate. Through the glass she saw him, a sniper in Russian kit, setting up with the kind of patience only a professional possessed. Her stomach tightened. A second duel, she whispered under her breath. Not tonight. She shifted positions, rolling behind a jagged outcrop, keeping low as the enemy sniper's scope swept across her ridge. The wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of his bolt chambering. He was waiting for her to make the first mistake. Meanwhile, in the compound, Callahan barked at his men. "Shift to cover fire! Force them into her sights!" Rounds rattled off the walls as the SEALs fired bursts toward advancing shapes. Emma seized the opening, sighted the Russian sniper, and took her shot. The round struck stone inches from his head, sending dust into the air. The sniper didn't flinch. He adjusted, patient, steady. Emma cursed under her breath and shifted again. They were mirrors of each other now, predator and prey, and whoever lost patience would die first. The duel stretched minutes into a lifetime. Then the sniper made a mistake. He adjusted his bipod on uneven stone, exposing a fraction of his silhouette. Emma fired. Through her scope she watched him collapse, rifle tumbling away into the dust. Relief surged, sharp and fleeting. She'd won, but the price of distraction was immediate. From the south, a rocket slammed into the compound wall, tearing a new breach. Dust and smoke billowed as fighters surged forward. "Contact south!" Reynolds screamed. The SEALs scrambled, firing their last rounds into the oncoming wave. Jacobs groaned, clutching his side as shrapnel tore through his vest. Ross dragged him into cover, shouting, "We're running out of time!" Emma swung her scope south, tracking the breach. She fired rapidly, cutting down the first 5 fighters, then reloaded with shaking hands. Callahan's voice snapped through her earpiece. "Morgan, we're out! Last mag's burning now!" Emma's eyes scanned desperately. Then she saw them, the same mercenaries with the reinforced case, moving steadily east. Their calm amidst the chaos made her blood run cold. "Captain, the case is moving. They're leaving the fight entirely," Callahan swore. "So that's what this is. We're bait." Emma's chest tightened. She couldn't follow, not yet. Not while the team was still breathing because of her. She chose again, as her father once had. Team first. Her rifle cracked over and over, covering every angle of the breach until the assault broke apart. The ground below was littered with bodies, but the SEALs' magazines lay empty. Ross threw down his rifle, grabbing a sidearm instead. "We can't shoot air, Captain! Then we fight with knives if we have to!" Callahan snapped. Silence followed. The enemy had pulled back again, regrouping for a final push. The lull was suffocating. Emma's comm crackled. A new voice, cold and smooth, Colonel Hale. "Emma Ward," he said. "Not Sierra Whiskey, not porcelain. Her name. You've done well. Exactly as expected." Her blood froze. "You knew," she whispered. "Of course, the ridge was yours by design. Every step you've taken, every bullet you've fired, it was part of the plan. Your father would be proud." Her jaw tightened. "Don't you dare use his name." "The case is all that matters," Hale continued, ignoring her anger. "Stay focused on the team. That's your role. Leave the rest to me." The line clicked dead. Emma stared through her scope, fury burning through exhaustion. Her father's voice rose in her memory again. "Never leave your team behind." She whispered back, "I won't. But I'm not your weapon either, Colonel." Below, Callahan's voice snapped through. "Morgan, last stand. They're massing again." Emma adjusted her scope, marking the incoming waves. Hundreds of them, pouring toward the compound like a tide. The SEALs clutched empty rifles, knives drawn, bracing for death. Emma settled her rifle, finger on the trigger. Her hands shook with fatigue, but her eyes burned with resolve. "Not tonight," she whispered. Her rifle roared again, cracking through the smoke and night, holding back the flood one shot at a time. The SEALs rose with her fire, their voices hoarse but fierce, meeting the tide head-on. For every fighter that charged, Emma carved another space of survival. The compound shook, the night burned, and the line between life and death blurred, but still they fought. And somewhere beyond the chaos, the case moved farther into the mountains, carrying secrets too dangerous to lose. Emma knew the truth now. This wasn't just survival, this was betrayal. And when dawn came, if it came, she would no longer fight just to protect her team. She would fight to uncover the truth, no matter who had written them off as expendable. Her father's words became her vow. Never leave your team behind, never again. And with every thunderous shot from the ridge, Emma carved that promise into the battlefield itself. The compound groaned under the weight of battle. Its fractured walls seemed ready to crumble, yet inside them, 24 SEALs clung to life with grit alone. The air was thick with smoke, acrid dust, and the metallic tang of blood. Every breath burned. Every heartbeat was a reminder that they were still alive, for now. Captain Callahan crouched in the center, his voice raw from shouting, "Check ammo!" Ross lifted his rifle, shook his head. "Empty, sir." Sidearm left. Reynolds slammed his last magazine into place with trembling hands. "One mag. That's it." A murmur ran through the survivors, not despair, SEALs didn't break that way, but a grim acknowledgement the next wave would crush them unless something changed. From her perch on the eastern ridge, Emma adjusted her scope. Her arms were numb, her shoulder bruised deep from hours of recoil, but her aim never wavered. She could see everything. Enemy fighters converging in clusters, RPG teams slinking into new positions, and behind it all, a shadowy order directing the chaos. Her breath caught when she spotted the case again, metal, reinforced, carried by mercenaries who moved with unsettling precision. "Captain," she said through the comm, her voice hoarse but steady, "the case is moving east again. This ambush is just cover." Callahan swore under his breath. "Figures! They're using us as bait!" Emma's jaw tightened. She already knew who had orchestrated it. Colonel Hale. His voice had crackled across her comm hours ago, cold and clinical, telling her everything was unfolding as planned. Her father's voice whispered in memory, "Never leave your team behind." She pressed her cheek harder against the rifle stock. Not tonight. The next wave came screaming through the smoke, war cries echoing off the mountains. RPGs streaked into the walls, sending stone and dust raining down. The SEALs fired what little remained, their muzzles flashing like fireflies in the dark. When the last rifle clicked empty, they drew knives and sidearms, preparing to meet death up close. Emma squeezed the trigger. One fighter dropped, another. She swung her barrel, fired again, each shot carving space, forcing the enemy to scatter. The Barrett thundered like a god's hammer, drowning out the chaos. Inside the compound, the men looked up in disbelief. Each time an enemy crept close enough to strike, a rifle cracked from above, saving them. "Who the hell is she?" Reynolds muttered, his voice a mixture of awe and desperation. "Doesn't matter," Callahan growled. "She's ours. And she's keeping us alive." Emma shifted positions, crawling across jagged stone to avoid counterfire. Her hands bled, her elbows scraped raw, but she didn't stop. Through the scope she caught sight of movement. Another sniper, Russian-trained, settling in on the western ridge. Her stomach turned cold. She'd killed one earlier, but this one was patient, methodical, a predator like her. She whispered to herself, "Your move." The duel stretched across minutes that felt like hours. The Russian's scope glinted briefly, betraying his position. Emma fired, stone chips exploding near his head. He adjusted calmly, returning fire. The round hissed past her ear, close enough to sting. She exhaled slowly, her father's lesson grounding her. "Find the space between heartbeats." She squeezed. The Russian dropped, his body tumbling limp against the rocks. Emma rolled to a new spot, her breath ragged. One threat gone, but hundreds remained. She scanned again, marking RPG teams. Her rifle cracked 5 times in rapid succession, each round silencing a launcher before it could fire. "Captain," she said, "your northern flank is clear. Push southeast now. It's your only chance." Callahan relayed the order, his men moving with exhausted precision. They dragged the wounded, leaping from cover to cover as Emma's shots carved the path. But as the SEALs shifted position, Emma's scope caught something that froze her blood. Colonel Hale's figure, unmistakable even in silhouette, stood beside Volkov, the mercenary leader carrying the case. Her heart pounded. Hale was here. Not safe at base, not coordinating from some distant bunker. He was here, orchestrating the slaughter with cold detachment. "Captain," she whispered, "it's worse than you think." "Hale's in the valley, he's working with them." There was silence on the comm. Then Callahan's voice, low and dangerous. "Say again. I've got visual. He's not commanding us. He's betraying us." Anger rippled through the men. Reynolds spat into the dirt. Ross clenched his knife tighter. But Callahan's voice stayed steady. "Then we adapt, we survive, and we expose him." Emma's stomach twisted. She wanted to fire, to put a bullet through Hale right then, but the case, always the case, moved farther east. If it left these mountains, Manhattan could burn. Her father's words returned again, softer this time. The mission matters, but the people, they're everything, she whispered. I won't choose between them. Not this time. Her rifle roared once more, cutting down fighters pressing too close to the SEALs. Then she shifted, tracking the case as it moved up a ridge. Volkov glanced back once, his eyes cold, calculating, as if daring her to follow. Emma's hands trembled, but her resolve did not. She knew what had to be done. She had to split her focus, protect the team and shadow the case. "Captain," she said, her voice firmer now, "I'll cover you until you reach the ravine. After that, you're on your own. I have to follow the case." "No," Callahan snapped. "We survive together or not at all. You'll survive because I'll make sure you do. That's the promise." The comm went quiet. Then Callahan said, softer than she'd ever heard him, "Don't die on me, Morgan." She almost smiled. "Not planning to." Emma shifted her gear, slinging the Barrett across her back, strapping the climbing harness tighter. She fired 3 more rounds, breaking the enemy's momentum, then slipped into the shadows of the ridge. Below, the SEALs fought with knives, fists, and sheer will. Above, Emma moved like a ghost, her eyes locked on the case, her father's voice a steady drumbeat in her mind. She wasn't porcelain, she never had been. She was steel, and tonight she would prove it to the world. The ravine cut like a scar through the Afghan mountains, jagged stone rising steep on either side, the air thin and sharp with dust. The SEALs staggered into it, 24 men reduced to 19 now, dragging the wounded with them. Captain Callahan's face was pale beneath the grime, eyes scanning the terrain with relentless precision. Every instinct told him they were still prey, the enemy circling just out of sight. "Set perimeter," he barked. "Knives, pistols, fists if you have to. We're not dying in a hole." Ross eased Jacobs against the rock, checking the bloody bandage that wrapped his ribs. "He won't last long without evac, sir. Then we hold until evac can get here," Callahan said. He didn't add that evac might never come. Above them, Emma pressed herself into the stone of the ridge, eyes fixed through her scope on the small convoy climbing east. The reinforced case gleamed in the first light of dawn, strapped to the back of one mercenary, while Volkov led with steady steps. They were confident, unhurried, as if certain nothing could touch them. Her hands itched to pull the trigger, to drop the man carrying the case where he stood. But at that distance, with wind cutting sharp across the valley, one bad shot could rupture whatever was inside. And if Volkov had been telling the truth about a dead man's switch, even a perfect hit could doom them all. Her earpiece crackled. "Morgan." It was Callahan, his voice strained. "We're down to knives and prayer. If you've got anything left, now's the time." Emma shifted her scope back to the ravine. Fighters crept forward, using the rocks as cover. Dozens of them, maybe more. They were testing the perimeter, waiting for the right moment to swarm. "I've got you," she said. She took a slow breath, found the space between heartbeats, and fired. A fighter dropped, then another. The rest scattered like startled animals. Ross raised his head at the sound of the Barrett. "She's still with us," he muttered. Callahan pressed a hand to his headset. "Keep breathing, boys. She's our guardian angel." Emma fired again, each round buying them moments. But she couldn't stay fixed on the ravine. Her gaze kept pulling back to Volkov, to the case, to the truth sliding further from reach with every step they took up the mountain. Her father's words whispered again, "Never leave your team behind." And yet, what about the millions of lives at risk if that device reached its destination? Her pulse hammered. She couldn't fail either mission, not the men, not the millions. She made her choice. "Captain," she said, voice hard now. I'll keep thinning them out, but I'm moving east. The case is priority. Hold that ravine as long as you can. If you're still breathing, at dawn, evac will find you.
Damn it, Morgan, that's suicide.
Maybe, she admitted, but it's mine to take. A pause, then Callahan's voice, low and steady. Go.
We'll make it.
Just bring that case back. Emma slung the Barrett across her back, cinched her harness, and began moving along the ridge, shadowing Volkov's convoy. Her boots scraped rock, fingers clawed at jagged holds, every movement deliberate despite exhaustion. She climbed higher, always keeping the case in sight. Below, the SEALs fought with desperation. Reynolds slashed at an attacker with his knife, dragging him down into the dust. Ross fired his last round point blank into another. Callahan roared orders, his voice carrying above the chaos even as blood dripped from his arm. And through it all, Emma's rifle cracked at intervals, cutting down threats the men never saw. Hours stretched thin. The sun rose higher, heat baking the stone. Emma's throat burned, her muscles screamed, but she pushed on. Each shot from her rifle was another promise kept. Finally, she reached a vantage above a plateau where Volkov's team had stopped. She crouched low, glassing the scene. The mercenaries set up a perimeter, weapons trained outward. Volkov knelt by a communications array, speaking into a handset with calm authority. Her stomach knotted when she heard the words through her directional mic. Exchange proceeds. Case stable. Buyer inbound. A helicopter. She could already hear the faint thrum of rotors. Emma's pulse spiked. If the device left on that chopper, it was over. She slid the Barrett into place, checked her scope. 5 targets, maybe 6, all trained, all alert. No room for error. The rotors grew louder. Dust swirled. Emma whispered to herself, "Find the space between heartbeats." She fired. One guard fell. Before the others could react, she shifted, fired again, dropping the man at Volkov's side. Chaos erupted. Mercenaries scrambled for cover, shouting in Russian. Emma kept firing, each round precise, until only Volkov remained crouched by the case. The helicopter hovered low now, its downdraft kicking grit into the air. A rope ladder unrolled, swaying in the turbulence. Volkov grabbed the case, dragging it toward the ladder. Emma tracked him through the scope, her finger tight on the trigger. "Stop!" she shouted, though he couldn't hear her. Through the glass, his face turned up toward her ridge. He smiled, a cold, knowing smile. Then he began climbing, case strapped to his back. Emma's whole body shook. If she shot, if the case ruptured, the entire valley would vanish in nuclear fire. If she didn't, New York or some other city could burn. Her father's voice whispered again, almost unbearably close. "The people, Katie, they're everything." Her finger trembled on the trigger, and then a shot cracked across the plateau, not hers. Volkov jerked, a red blossom bursting from his forehead. The case swung free as his body tumbled from the ladder, crashing onto the stone below. Emma froze. Slowly she turned her scope. There, on a ridge opposite hers, stood Colonel Hale, rifle still smoking. Her blood ran cold. He hadn't betrayed them from afar. He'd been here all along, orchestrating every move, every death. The helicopter banked hard, pulling away as its gunners sprayed the rocks, but Hale didn't flinch. He looked across the distance, straight at Emma, raised his hand in a mock salute, then vanished behind the stone. Emma's chest heaved. Rage, grief, betrayal, all twisted inside her. Her comm crackled. Callahan's voice, weak but fierce. "Morgan, report." She swallowed hard. "Volkov is down. The case is secure." Cheers erupted faintly in the background, but Callahan's voice sharpened. "And Hale?" Emma stared at the empty ridge. Gone. She lowered her rifle, her body trembling with exhaustion. The SEALs had survived, for now. The case was in her hands, but Hale's shadow loomed larger than ever. She whispered to herself, voice breaking but resolute, "This ends with me." And as the sun burned over the Afghan peaks, Emma Morgan prepared for the reckoning that would come. The sun clawed higher over the Afghan peaks, its glare turning stone into molten gold and shadows into pools of black. The battlefield had gone eerily quiet. No more waves of fighters rushed the ravine, no more RPGs screamed through the air, only the groans of the wounded SEALs and the distant thrum of the retreating helicopter remained. Captain Callahan slumped against the rock, blood streaking his cheek, uniform shredded but spirit unbroken. "Status," he rasped. Ross checked his men, 3 critical, 5 walking wounded, ammo's down to sidearms and blades. "We can't hold another push." Callahan clenched his jaw. He wanted to curse, to rage, but his eyes drifted skyward. Somewhere up there, Emma Morgan still held the line. Somewhere she had changed the course of this night. "Keep the perimeter," he said. "She's buying us time. Don't waste it." On the ridge, Emma crawled to the reinforced case lying amid the dust where Volkov had fallen. She ran her hands over the metal, her fingers trembling. Radiation detectors blinked faintly on its surface. The weight of it felt wrong, not just in her arms, but in her soul. "Captain," she said into her comm, her voice raw, "I've got the package. It's intact." There was silence. Then Callahan's voice cracked through. "Copy. You're a damn miracle, Morgan. Without you—" He stopped. His voice thickened. "Without you, we'd all be dead." Emma closed her eyes briefly. Not a miracle, just doing what I promised, but her relief soured when she glanced at the opposite ridge. Hale had been there. She had seen him with her own eyes, rifle still smoking after killing Volkov. Now he was gone, vanished into the labyrinth of stone. Her heart thundered. She had questions stacked like bullets in a magazine. Why had Hale staged this slaughter? Why appear just long enough to finish Volkov himself? Why smile at her, salute, then vanish? Her comm hissed, a secure frequency, the one Hale had used before. "Emma," his voice was low, calm, almost paternal. "Secure the device. Extraction is en route. Do not engage further." Her grip tightened on the comm unit. "You planned this. You used them. 24 men as bait." A pause. "Then, war requires sacrifices. You know that better than anyone now." Her stomach churned. She almost hurled the comm into the valley, but she stopped herself. Hale wanted her angry, wanted her unbalanced. She wouldn't give him that. Instead, she whispered, "This isn't over." And she cut the line. The sound of boots crunching stone jolted her. She swung her rifle ready to fire, but stopped when she saw Ross climbing toward her with 2 SEALs at his side, faces grey from exhaustion. "Captain sent us," Ross gasped. "We're to help secure whatever the hell that thing is." His eyes widened at the sight of the case. "Sweet Jesus, is that—" Emma silenced him with a look. "Don't ask. Just help me move it." They dragged the case into partial cover, wedging it between jagged rocks. Ross finally muttered, "Hale was supposed to be at command." "Tell me I'm wrong, Morgan. Tell me I didn't see what I think I saw." Emma met his gaze, steady despite the storm inside her. "You saw it." The words hit Ross like a blow. He swore under his breath, fists clenched. "Then, when we get out of here, he answers for it. I don't care how many stars he's got on his collar." Before Emma could reply, gunfire erupted from the north, sharp, coordinated bursts, not the wild spray of Taliban fighters. These were trained men, mercenaries, reinforcements. Ross's eyes widened. How many? Emma scanned through her scope. Too many, at least 40, and they're moving like professionals. The SEAL beside her muttered, "We can't hold that." Emma adjusted her position, settling behind the Barrett. "We don't have to. We just need to hold until dawn. Air support will come with the light." She fired. One mercenary spun and dropped. Another fell a heartbeat later, but the rest didn't scatter. They pressed forward with disciplined precision. Ross fired his pistol until it clicked empty, then grabbed a fallen rifle. "They're trying to cut us off from the ravine." Emma kept shooting, each round deliberate. Sweat stung her eyes, her shoulders screamed, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Every shot meant one more SEAL lived another minute. Through the scope, she spotted a familiar figure among the advancing mercenaries. Hale. He strode calmly, issuing silent hand signals, orchestrating the assault like a conductor leading an orchestra of death. Her blood boiled. She steadied her scope on him, finger tightening, then froze. He wasn't just walking, he was watching her. Even at that distance, his eyes locked with hers through the glass. He raised 2 fingers, tapped his temple, then gestured east. A signal, a command, as if she were still his pawn. Emma's breath caught. For a moment, doubt stabbed her. If she fired, would the dead man switch? Volkov claimed trigger? Was Hale gambling she wouldn't risk it? Her finger twitched, but she didn't fire. Not yet. Instead, she whispered, "Not on your terms, Colonel. Never again." She shifted, targeted the mercenaries closest to her SEAL brothers, and let the Barrett thunder. The battle raged for another hour, fire and stone and blood mingling under the merciless sun. SEALs fought like wolves cornered, every strike desperate yet disciplined. Emma's rifle barked until the barrel burned hot, her hands blistered. Finally, the eastern horizon flared with light, the first streaks of dawn breaking over the mountains, and with it came the distant roar of jet engines. Air support. The mercenaries faltered as the sky split open. F-16 seconds screamed low, unleashing precise ordnance that shattered enemy positions in fire and dust. The ground trembled, the valley filling with thunder. SEALs raised ragged cheers. Emma lowered her rifle, chest heaving. Ross fell back against the rock, laughing through tears. "We made it! God help me, we actually made it!" Emma looked once more through her scope, searching for Hale. He was gone, vanished again. But in her gut, she knew. He had chosen to disappear, leaving her with the victory he had engineered, the device secure, but the truth buried beneath rubble and lies. Her comm crackled with Callahan's weary voice. "Air support has the valley. Evac birds inbound. Hold your positions. We're going home." Emma exhaled a shuddering breath. Home, but what waited there? Commendations? Lies? Or the reckoning she now knew she couldn't avoid? She touched the case with trembling fingers, her father's words echoing once more. Never leave your team behind. She had kept that promise. But another loomed larger now. She whispered into the rising sun, "Hale, I'm coming for you." And as the helicopters thudded toward them, blades chopping the new day into fragments of sound and shadow, Emma Morgan braced herself for the next battle, one not fought with bullets but with truth. The helicopters roared across the valley, their blades chopping the thin mountain air into a deafening rhythm that rattled broken walls and stirred the acrid smoke of battle. Dust and ash swirled in choking clouds as the battered SEALs were lifted from the ravine, one by one, their exhausted bodies collapsing onto steel decks with the weight of survival. The smell of cordite and blood clung to them, mingling with the metallic tang of fuel that burned from the chopper's exhaust. Captain Callahan sat slumped against the wall of the bird, eyes half closed but never losing focus. Beside him, Ross held pressure on Reynolds' shoulder wound, his own face streaked with grime and streaks of dried blood. Across from them, Emma Morgan sat silent, her Barrett broken down into parts, packed neatly as if the last 12 hours had not been a maelstrom of death and betrayal. The reinforced case, heavier than any weight she had ever carried, sat strapped to the deck, vibrating faintly with each chop of the rotors. No one spoke at first. It was the silence of men who had seen too much, lost too much, and were too tired to rage about it. But the silence had a weight, and everyone knew words would eventually come. Callahan cracked it first. His voice was hoarse, each syllable like gravel. Whatever that is, he jerked his chin toward the case, was worth every bullet they threw at us. His gaze slid to Emma, and somehow you knew. Emma didn't flinch. She met his eyes with a steadiness that came not from calm, but from exhaustion layered with resolve. "I didn't know everything," she said, "but I knew enough. Hale didn't send us here to rescue anyone. That scientist, Vulov, whatever name they gave him, wasn't a hostage. He was the mission. The case was the prize." The other SEALs exchanged looks, a mix of disbelief and fury. Reynolds, pale from blood loss but still conscious, whispered, "We were bait." Ross slammed his fist against the steel wall. "God damn it!" "We walked straight into it." Emma's voice cut through their anger, low but unwavering. "You didn't walk into it. You were sent by a man who knew exactly what would happen." Callahan leaned forward, studying her face. "And you?" His tone wasn't accusatory but measured. "Where do you stand in this?" Emma hesitated. She could feel Hale's shadow pressing against her even here, a phantom hand on her shoulder, reminding her the leash he'd always believed he held. But she pushed it aside. "I stand with you. I stand with the men who fought and bled while he watched from the sidelines. He made me a weapon, but I choose where I aim." The captain's eyes lingered on her. Then he gave a slow nod. "Good. Because when we land, there will be questions, and I intend to give answers whether they want them or not." The helicopter banked hard, engines screaming as it descended toward forward operating base Chapman. The tarmac below swarmed with medics, CIA suits, and soldiers. As the bird touched down, the world exploded into motion, stretchers rushing the wounded away, agents surrounding the case, orders shouted in clipped tones drowned by rotor thunder. Emma stepped down last, the Afghan dust whipping around her boots. Colonel Hale was waiting at the edge of the landing zone. His uniform was immaculate, as if he hadn't been in the same war. His eyes, however, were steel, and when they locked on Emma, something colder than victory passed between them. "Lieutenant Morgan," he said, voice carrying over the chaos. "Well done. The device is secure. Debrief in 15. Callahan staggered forward, bloodied and unbowed. "You lying son of a bitch." Every head within earshot turned. Agents froze, medics glanced over their shoulders, soldiers paused mid-stride. Callahan's voice, ragged with fury, carried the truth raw and naked into the open air. "You used my men as bait. You fed us false intel. We lost brothers because of you." Hale didn't blink. "Captain, stand down. Your condition is compromising your judgment." "My judgment?" Callahan stepped closer until he was nearly nose to nose with the older man. "My judgment kept 20 men alive in a kill box you designed. Don't talk to me about judgment." The tension rippled outward like shock waves. Emma stood frozen, caught between them. She could see the glint of triumph hidden behind Hale's calm mask. He knew the system. He knew the truth could be buried under layers of classification until it suffocated. She couldn't let that happen. Emma stepped forward, her voice carrying clear. "Captain Callahan's right. I saw you with Volkov. You were there, Colonel. You weren't just in on this. You orchestrated it." Gasps echoed. Agents shifted uneasily, their eyes darting between Hale and Emma. For the first time, Hale's mask cracked, if only slightly. His gaze burned into hers, a warning, a promise of consequences, but Emma held steady. You trained me for this moment. You made me into a sniper, a ghost in the shadows. But you forgot one thing, Colonel. I'm not porcelain. I don't break, and I don't lie to cover your sins." Silence crushed the landing zone until the only sound was the chopper blades slowing to a weary spin. Hale's voice, when it came, was soft but lethal. "This conversation is over. Debriefing, now." But the men had heard enough. Ross stepped forward, his voice loud and defiant. "You don't order us anymore, sir. Not after this." The line had been crossed. Hale turned on his heel, signaling for his agents to secure the device, but the air had shifted. Doubt now walked among the ranks, and it would not be silenced. The debrief room smelled of stale coffee and secrets. Emma sat opposite Hale, a steel table between them. A recording device blinked red. CIA officials lined the walls like vultures. Callahan sat beside her, his uniform stained, his presence a statement of defiance. Hale spoke first, his tone clipped. "Operation Kingfisher was a success. Target neutralized. Nuclear device recovered. Casualties acceptable." Emma leaned forward, her voice sharp. "Casualties acceptable. Tell that to Walker, fighting for his life in medical. Tell that to the families of the men who bled in a trap you set." One of the officials cut in. "Lieutenant Morgan, your role here was communications. Your claims about the colonel's involvement. I was there," she snapped. "I had him in my scope. He gave orders to mercenaries. He killed Volkov himself." Hale's smile was faint, almost pitying. "Hallucinations, combat stress. She's been through too much." The words struck like knives. Emma slammed her hands on the table. "Don't you dare! You trained me to see clearly when everyone else falters. You don't get to call me broken just because I finally see you for what you are." The room fell into uneasy silence. Hale's mask remained intact, but Emma caught the flicker of something beneath it. Fear. 3 days later, the official report was filed. Intelligence operation compromised by unexpected enemy strength. Extraction successful. Device secured. Losses minimal. Hale's fingerprints were all over it, sterilizing the truth into neat lies. But Emma had made her own report. A small device slipped to Callahan before they left the debrief room. Files, recordings, proof, everything she had pulled before disabling her tracker. It was dangerous, maybe suicidal, but it was real. Callahan read it in silence, then looked up at her. "You know what this means?" Emma nodded. "War. Not on the battlefield, in the shadows. And Hale?" Her jaw tightened. "He made me his weapon. Now I decide who I aim at." 6 months later, autumn wind whispered through Arlington National Cemetery. Rows of white headstones stretched like an ocean of silence. Emma stood before one newly updated. William Morgan, Chief Petty Officer, U.S. Navy. He never left anyone behind. She traced the letters with her fingers, her throat tight. For years, she had carried the weight of his death as a failure, as Hale had framed it. Now she knew the truth. Her father had died a hero, choosing his men over the mission. The choice Hale had called weakness was, in truth, the ultimate strength. Footsteps crunched behind her. Callahan approached, his uniform pressed, his eyes still shadowed by what they had endured. "They gave him the Navy Cross," he said quietly. "The record's been corrected. Took a fight, but the truth's on paper now." Emma swallowed hard. It should have been this way all along. Callahan stood beside her, hands clasped behind his back. "Hale's been forced into retirement. Advisory role, no command. But men like him never really stop." Emma's gaze stayed on her father's name. "Then I'll be ready. This time I won't be his pawn. I'll be the one watching from the ridge." The captain gave a slow nod. "I've got a team forming. We'll need someone who can shoot straighter than God and tell the truth when the lies pile up." "You in?" For the first time in months, Emma allowed herself a faint smile. "I never left." They stood together as the wind rustled through the leaves, the weight of loss heavy but not crushing. Emma felt her father's words echo once more. "Never leave your team behind." She whispered, "I won't, Dad. Not ever." And as the sun set over the cemetery, painting the marble stones in gold, Emma Morgan stepped into her next war. Not Hale's war, not even America's war, but her own. A war for truth, a war for every man who had bled in silence, a war for the promise her father had died to keep. The story of Emma Morgan does not end on that ridge in the Pamir Highlands, nor in the smoke-filled debrief room where truths were buried under layers of classified ink. Her journey is a reminder that wars are fought not only with rifles and explosives, but also with choices, with the courage to resist manipulation, and with the will to stand for those who cannot speak for themselves. Emma was forged in the shadow of betrayal, shaped by a mentor who saw her as a tool, yet she refused to remain a weapon without a conscience. She chose her team. She chose truth. She chose to honor her father's legacy, not by repeating his fate, but by carrying forward his ethos: never leave your team behind. That decision cost her the protection of the system that raised her, but it gave her something greater: the freedom to decide who she was and who she would become. For Captain Callahan and the men who survived that impossible night, Emma's presence on the ridge was the difference between annihilation and survival. Her rifle was not just steel and powder, it was loyalty given form, a promise fulfilled in every shot. And yet, beyond the confirmed kills and tactical brilliance, what saved them was her resolve to fight not for Hale's secret agenda, but for the men beside her, bleeding in the dust. In the aftermath, files will be stamped classified. Reports will twist sacrifice into sterile phrases like acceptable losses. But stories like this survive not because officials preserve them, but because people remember. Because voices rise to say, "We were there, and it mattered." Here on VeteranBiker, that is why we tell these stories. Not to glorify conflict, but to honor the courage that surfaces in its darkest hours. To remind every listener that heroes are not defined by medals or ranks, but by the choices they make when no one is watching. So as Emma Morgan walks forward into the next shadow war, she carries more than a sniper's skill or a soldier's training. She carries a burden we all share: to remember, to question, and to protect the truths that others would bury. She is her father's daughter, but she is also something more, her own sentinel in the silence, guarding not only lives but legacies. If this story moved you, if it made you think about sacrifice, loyalty, and the price of truth, then we invite you to stay with us. Subscribe to VeteranBiker for more untold accounts of courage under fire. Comment below with your thoughts. What would you have done in Emma's place? Would you pull the trigger or hold your fire? Your voice matters, just as much as the voices of those who lived it. And as this video closes, more stories wait for you on the screen. Stories of warriors, of quiet acts of defiance, of choices that echo long after the smoke clears. Watch them, share them, and keep the memory alive. From all of us here at VeteranBiker, thank you for riding with us through this journey. Remember, the fight for truth never ends, and neither do the stories worth telling.